We just came from a very emotional levaya. Our community lost a pillar, a great rabbi, someone who hid himself in Pashtut. We couldn't possibly grasp how great he is because he wouldn't let us. He hid himself with such brilliance that even if you tried to grasp how great he was, it would be impossible. He wouldn't let you. You tried to give him kavod, he wouldn't let you. You tried to honor him in any which way, he'd run away. He specifically went out of his way to keep the Pashtut and make a statement. While everybody else was driving around in $100,000 cars, he was riding on a bicycle. And he laughed at us. He laughed at us. He looked at us. As if to say, don't you remember who you are? Are you really falling for all this? The whole smoke and mirrors of America? All the materialism? Don't you remember where you came from? Don't you remember what was real? What life was about? And he was the standing marshal that reminded us of what the old country once looked like. It's amazing to me to be able to lose one man and we lost the whole world. Because he was that world. And by losing him, we lost that whole world. He was the mohel for everybody you've seen in the community. Could you imagine? He was the mohel for everybody. He was the kohen by every pidyon habed. He was the kohen. He was the mohel. He was the kohen. He was the shochet. He was the everything. He was literally an Abba to the people. Tonight you walked in a swarm of people. Mamash, the crowds didn't stop coming. The entire community came out to stand with one rabbi because he was a rabbi of the people. That's why the people loved him. Because he loved them. And they knew it. And to him it made no difference if somebody was religious, wasn't religious. It made no difference. You saw the love. You call him and you'd ask him to come to your house. He would come. He would come with his chickens. He would come with his keves in the backyard. He would sit in your house. You'd bring him a cup of tea. He would sit like the grandfather in the house. Everyone who was like his children. And boy, did he know the secret of how to camouflage. He would sit and talk to you smiling. He would make you laugh. And while he's talking to you, he had his hand on your head. And that hand was so heavy, I'm telling you. That hand was so heavy. He was strong. He was physically an ox. He was strong. When he put his hand on your head, your whole head went down. But while he was putting the weight on your head, he was taking the weight off your shoulders. There was nobody that knew the secret of how to unburden people with their problems like Chacham Eli Khalifa, Zechut Tzadik Libracha. Everybody came with problems. And to everybody, he smiled, he made them laugh, and he told them, it's going to be okay. Yeh beseder. It's okay. Yeh beseder. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. And while he's talking to the person, and while he's unbridling them from their hurt and their pain and their problems and their difficulties, he puts his hand on your head and he starts saying, and we don't know what he was saying, whatever he was talking to Shammai, I don't know what he was saying. And he'd give berachot and he would do tikkunim for people. Who do we have left that can do such things? Who? Who can bring tikkunim to people? Who knew how to take ayin hara off of families? Who knew how to be able to take the problems of people on his own shoulders? The reason why you saw thousands of people out there tonight walking behind Chacham Eli is because they understood we didn't just lose a rabbi. We lost a father. He was like a father to everybody. They loved him and he loved them. And you can't replace somebody like that. And what he knew, Not too many people know. He was mikubal, tzaddik. And boy, did he hide himself. Sometimes he would tell people certain things, and now you'll see. Now the stories are going to start coming out. Now. Because Chacham Eli ran away from Kavod. But now, Chacham, you can't run anymore. And now it catches up to you. And now the people are going to start crying and woeing and bemoaning the loss by telling over the stories of his legacy, of his life. And you're going to hear unbelievable stories, and you're going to say, what? We had someone like that amongst us, riding up and down Ocean Parkway on a bicycle. Why didn't I take advantage? Why didn't I spend more time with him? Why didn't I go to him more? Why didn't I see him more? Why didn't I talk to him more? Yeah. We don't appreciate what we have until we no longer have it. We don't appreciate what we have until we no longer have it. It's like this by all the Gedolim, all the Tzaddikim. Goes, man, they're still with us. We think they're part of the wallpaper of life. We think they'll always be there. And especially Chacham Eli, because he was strong, he was a gibor. And then he was so soft and so loving. And what he did for the Aniyim, people don't know, they have no idea. What he did for the Aniyim, people have no idea. He would go to the slaughterhouses. When he walked into the room with the sheep, they knew him. They all ran. They saw him. They knew what was coming. In a matter of minutes, shecht, cut up, package, jump back into the car with a few guys, come back and say, we have to give this meat out to the Aniyim. Rabbi, where, who? Come, I'll show you which houses. He'll show you this house, this person in the basement needs. Do you know he did this? Rabbi, how should I do it? Should I knock on the door and give the person the meat? He said, no. Chas v'shalom. Hype. You're going to embarrass the person? No way. You just put it on the handle, knock, and run. Come back quick to the car. That's what he told people. He would give out food to Aniyim. But he also stood. He stood for something that the old country had, a purity of what a Rav once was, in humility, humble, anav, she'en kamahu. He was the anav, unbelievable. Unbelievable. There was once a time where they used to measure greatness by smallness. The smaller you made yourself, the greater we realized who this person really is. The smaller they made themselves. Unbelievable. And he made himself so tsanua, so hidden. And in that we saw how giant of a tzaddik he was that we had no clue. It's in his merit that I'd like to give tonight's class. Leilu Nishmat, Chacham Eli Khalife, Ben Shafir, Zechut Tzadik L'Bracha, Zchuto Yagen Aleinu, Sheyamlitz Ba'adeinu, should be a melitz Yoshen on Shamayim for all of us. The way he was so close to us down here, the way he cared for us down here, he should do even more for us in the next world. Tzadikim in the next world, b'mitatan nikraim hayim, because they can do more in the next world than they were able to do in this world. And if he was so dedicated to such a beautiful community of people, his children, how much more is he going to do now in Shamayim? It's unbelievable. Tonight I want to talk about the Gadlut of Torah. Tonight I want to talk about the Gadlut of Talmidei Chachamim. L'chvod Chacham Eli, who loved Talmidei Chachamim. Loved. He was Mokir Talmidei Chachamim. He loved Talmidei Chachamim. He loved Torah. He loved the teachers of Torah. I was lucky enough to teach his grandson in high school for 2 years. Shahino, his grandson, his daughter's son. And he used to meet me in the street. And he used to tell me, oh, Rabbi Duvi. He used to tell me, thank you. My grandson loves you. He learns Torah by you. He had such hakarat hatov. He had such hakarat hatov. He had such good. He gave over such good. He loved Torah. He loved the ones that taught Torah, the teachers of Torah. It's unbelievable. How did we lose somebody this big? And it was a shock. We didn't see this one coming. Tonight I want to give a share on the gadlut of Torah and the learners of Torah. Without a question, from all the pieces of the magnificent kelim of the Mishkan, later on Bet HaMikdash, was none other than the Aron Brit Hashem, the Aron that held both sets of luchot, both the broken and then the second set of luchot. Later on, Sefer Torah, later on, Sinsenet Haman, was all placed in the Aron. You know, just to talk about this, you get a little bit of a feeling, a little bit of an emotion. I was in Israel just recently, and on Shabbat, I got up a little bit early because I was staying in the old city. I wanted so much to be able to get an opportunity to pray by that special spot. The spot right by the Kodesh HaKodashim. You go down into the tunnels, and you're able to walk up to that part of the wall. And there the sign hangs and it says, you are now standing opposite the Holy of Holies. You are now standing across the spot of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Could you imagine standing there? Can you imagine praying there? There's a certain portion of the wall right next to that spot that is very damp. And every now and then you see a little bead of water come down the stone. And if you go down there even with the tour guides, they'll tell you that they're not sure where the water is coming from. There is no body of water above that spot. I once went down there with a religious tour guide who mentioned the famous Midrash in Echa, that the Midrash writes that Hashem drops tears on the makom of the Kodesh HaKodashim every day. And he cries over us. He cries over Klal Yisrael. Oy lahem lebanim sheba'avonotehem galu mishulchan avihem hechrafti et beti sarafti et hechali. And Hashem cries over us every day. And he drops tears on that spot of the Kodesh Kodashim of once upon a time. Could you imagine this? To stand there, to put your hand and roll your hand against the stone as it's wet. And you think about this medrash and you say to yourself, could it be? Could this actually be the tears of Kudsha Berichu? Could you imagine that? How could you not break down thinking about that? Standing in that spot. I had to go. I didn't know how I was going to get down there, but I had to go. So I walked up to those glass doors where you generally take those Kotel tunnel tours. There was a guard there. It was 5:30 in the morning. I thought maybe when no one would be there, I could slip downstairs. Maybe I get lucky. The guard was there. And I said to him, I came from America. I have a Tehillim in my hand. Please. It would mean the world to me to be able to go downstairs to pray by the Kodesh HaKodashim, by that special spot. And he said to me, I would love to send you, but that spot is the ladies section for the Minyan HaMikubalim that pray right above that spot. They actually have a shul built down there for a special minyan of great tzaddikim Mikubalim. And the portion of that room actually overhangs that part right next to the Kodesh HaKodashim. He says, so the ladies, they actually are underneath by the spot you're describing, and the men are in the room upstairs that overhangs right above that spot of the Kodesh HaKodashim, a special minyan of Mekubalim that pray. So he says, I'm sorry, you can't go there because now it's a ladies section. I said, but it's 5:30 in the morning. The ladies are there? He laughs. He laughs at me. You American, you. You American, you. 5:30 in the morning, he says to me. They were there since 3, he told me. They were there since 3 a.m., he tells me. He's laughing at me. I'm not talking about the Mekubalim, Jack. I'm talking about the ladies. The ladies were there since 3 a.m. saying Tehillim on Shabbat. What a different world. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? The ladies are up at 3 a.m. saying Tehillim by the Kodesh HaKodashim on Shabbat. Where are we? I looked at him and I was so defeated. I said, okay, I can't even push anymore. What are you going to say to that? I thought it was the big tzaddik waking up at 5:30. I felt kazek katan. The ladies were down there since 3 in the morning. So I turned to him, I said, okay, I guess I can't go. So he looks at me and he says, oh wait, but you can go to the minyan in the Mekubalim that hangs right over the spot. I said, oh, you're right. I didn't think he'd let me in. I said, I can go to the minyan in the Mekubalim. That's a great idea. And he says, well, put on a mask. He hands me a mask. I said, I'll do anything you want to get down there. I'll put on a mask. I'll put on a jumpsuit, whatever you want. Just let me down there. He handed me the mask. I went downstairs. I walked through the entire, down to the bottom to the tunnel. Made my way up. Walked right up to the actual spot because the ladies were on the other side of the wall. And I actually stood for a minute or two without bothering anyone at the Kodesh HaKodashim. You are now standing opposite the Holy of Holies. I just started crying. And I saw the beads of the water coming down right off the side of the wall. And I'm thinking to myself, Hayitachen, could you imagine if this actually is the Medrash and Eicha? Could you imagine if this is the Eibishter's tears? Wow. And I opened up my Tehillim. And I didn't want to bother anybody. I saw they were starting to get a little nervous that a man was standing not too far away. I didn't want to chashon bother anyone. I just very quickly said the Hiratzon, the short one because it was Shabbat. And then I just said the first kapitel. Ashrei ha'ish, asher lo halach, ba'atzat rishayim, Jack. Asher lo halach, ba'atzat rishayim, uvderech tzadikim, uvderech, ashrei ha'ish, asher lo halach, ba'atzat rishayim, uvderech chataim lo amad, umoshav leitzim lo yashav, ki mitorat Hashem hefzo, uvtorato yehege yomam v'leila. Chacham Eli, Ashrei Ha'ish, Asher lo halach. And I said, look where I'm standing. I can't believe it. I said that one first kapitel, that one first paragraph, Aleph. And then I saw already people getting there. I turned around, I left. Don't bother anybody. I went upstairs to the Mekubalim. I walked inside, and everybody was dressed in white. I was the only guy in color. I was the colored man in the room, the only guy. I felt a little out of place. Everybody was in white. They were like angels. I stood in the back quietly, and I started to say my Tehillim as they were praying. And I tried to get as close to the corner of the shul, which is the spot that overhangs the Kodesh HaKodashim. And I said to myself, the entire trip was worth it just for this. Just for this minute. Just for this minute. I could say the book of Tehillim hanging over the Kodesh HaKodashim. The whole trip was worth this minute. And Levi, I want you to know that Borei Olam wants to see how much you want. And if you want, He'll give. But you have to want, you have to push, and you have to fight for it. Because if you fight for it, it means you really want it. And that's why you walk in, you ask the guard, can I go down? He says, no, but I want. You want? Okay. So you can go down, but not there, here. Suddenly the door's open because you showed you want. That's the way we fight for the Kodesh HaKodashim. We had the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodashim, the place that the Kohen Gadol would go in, lifnai v'lifnim. And the pasuk that we just read in this past week told us that when they made the Aron, Bitzalel, Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed, Va'asita shnayim kiruvim zahav. Make 2 cherubs, 2 angels, 2 kiruvim out of gold. Mikshar ta'aseh otam. Bang them out, make them mishnei kitzot hakaporet, that they should stand on the 2 ends of the kaporet, which is the flat portion of the top of the box of the Aron. Facing each other, as we know, they sat and faced each other with their wings in the air. It's amazing. The very next pasuk says, "Va'aseh kiruv echad mikatzeh mizeh, ukruv echad mikatzeh mizeh." Didn't we just say that? Didn't the first pasuk just say, make 2 keruvim, place them on top of the Aron, on the kaporet, one at one end, the other at the other end? The very next pasuk, "Va'aseh kruv echad mikatzeh mizeh, kruv echad mikatzeh mizeh." You just told me that in the last pasuk. So Rashi explains that the repetition here was to tell you that you might have thought you should put 2 kiruvim on one side and 2 kiruvim on the other side, meaning 4. And therefore the next pasuk says, no. 1 on one side and 1 on the other side, in total just 2. But it's very interesting. Wouldn't the pasuk just simply be able to cut to the chase and just simply said, Aseh kruv echad mikatzeh mizeh, v'kruv echad mikatzeh mizeh? And we would have understood that you put 1 on one side and 1 on the other side. Do you need 2 pesukim to first be vague and then the second one be clear to explain what the first one really meant? Just tell me the clear one and I get it all. 1 pasuk does the job. And because of this, says Or HaHaim HaKadosh, that there's something much bigger going on over here. Mama, something incredible. A story in history that many people don't know. Rabotai, did you know that many years later, in the book of Melachim, it tells over, and by the way, I want to stop for a minute and give credit where credit is due to my good friend, Yedid Nafshi, Rabbi Gladstein from Cedarhurst, that the Mar Mekomot of tonight's share, the stories we're going to add, the Mar Mekomot of tonight's share comes from his shmuz. Hashem should bless him with arichut, yamim v'shanim. Give him kochot for Klal Yisrael. Fantastic Talmid Chacham. In the book of Melachim, in Melachim Aleph Perek Vav, it tells us a period where Shlomo HaMelech was building the Bet HaMikdash, and it was at that time that Shlomo was creating some of the kelim to be used in Bet HaMikdash and upgrading some of the kelim from the original Mishkan. And the original Aron, the Aron of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Aron of the Mishkan, Shlomo HaMelech went and changed, added and upgraded. That instead of the Aron with 2 keruvim on the kaporet, the way it originally was made by Bitzalel and Moshe Rabbeinu from the Mishkan, Shlomo added another 2 kerubim. And a matter of fact, the second set of cherubs, the second set of keruvim that Shlomo added to the Aron were huge, 10 amot each. How much is 10 amot? 20 feet, could you imagine? 20 feet, the size of one of the keruvim. These keruvim were towering over the original set of keruvim that came from the Aron of Moshe Rabbeinu. So picture this. Could I have that box for a minute, please? Picture this for a minute. Thank you. I have the Aron, and then on the Aron, I have the 2 keruvim from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. And then, towering above these 2 keruvim, there are another 2 keruvim that are actually much higher than the original 2 keruvim. So you have 2 angels facing each other, and then above them, you have another set of 2 angels, much higher, hovering over the lower set of 2 angels. Sachakol in total, 4 angels, 4 keruvim on the Aron of Shlomo HaMelech. And that was the Aron that was in the Kodesh HaKodashim in the Bet HaMikdash. And the $1 million question is, Shlomo, Are you allowed to change the Aron from the way Hashem originally instructed, the way it should be made? If Hashem instructed B'Tzalel and Moshe to make the Aron with 2 angels, how are you to add another 2? Do you know that Rashi in the Torah tells us that not only aren't you allowed to be Oved Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to create Avodah Zarah. And one of the examples, you're not going to believe this, one of the examples that Rashi uses for making Avodah Zarah is if someone would come along and take one of the kelim of the Bet HaMikdash and change it from the way it was originally told to be made, that new creation or change from the kelim of the way it was meant to be made, and now it's made different, is called Avodah Zarah. Wouldn't this be a prime example of that? How is Shlomo allowed to change? And isn't this an infringement of exactly what Rashi was highlighting in Chumash? If Hashem said to make it with 2 angels, you can go and make it now with 4. How is he allowed to do this? And Rabotai, we're talking here about the smartest of all men. Shlomo HaMelech, Chacham Mikol Adam. What was the reason behind doing it in the first place? Udika'arile, my ka'arile. What was his havamina? What was he thinking? Why would you add another 2 angels to the Aron? What, was it missing anything? Chas v'shalom. And yet these 2 angels were huge. Each one was 10 amot. Each one was 20 feet of solid gold, hovering over the original angels from the Aron of Moshe Rabbeinu. What for? Shlomo, and your brilliance, what did you see need and fit to be able to do that? Why would you add it? Rabotai, open your heart so we can hear something incredible tonight. And this is something that really, the Chatam Sofer, he writes a Hidush Ayom V'Nora. Really Ayom V'Nora. If you think about it for a minute, the Mishkan had all different types of kelim. And the Mishkan was a traveling Mishkan. And because of that, constantly, they were putting up the Mishkan and bringing it down, packing it up, traveling, and then erecting it, putting it back up again, and putting it down. 42 masaot. There were plenty of times where it was brought down and put it back up. And because of that, the Mishkan was constantly traveling. And the way they traveled with the kelim was that every one of the main kelim, the shulchan, the mizbeach, the aron, they were carried al yedei badim. So they had these tabaot zav, they had these rings that hung off the sides. They put the badim through the rings. And then they obviously would have 4 guys, 2 on the front, 2 on the back, that would hoist up the shulchan, and they would carry it with them to the next stop. And then when they would finish traveling, they would put it back down, pull out the badim, and then set up the shulchan where it belongs in the Mishkan. On all the different kelim, the badim were used to carry them. And when they were done, they were pulled out of the keli until the next time they traveled. All the kelim except the aron. The aron, the badim were not allowed to be taken out from the tabaot of the aron. Lo yasuru mimenu. Do not take it away from the aron. Once the badim were placed in the tabaot and now part of the aron, it could never be separated from the aron itself. So the rods that they used to carry the aron literally became part and parcel of the makeup of the aron Hashem, never to be taken away or separated from the aron. Now this is amazing. So many different kelim. They all had rods to carry them, the badim. And yet only the aron are you not allowed to take the badim out of. You cannot separate the badim from the aron. So it's here that all the Balei Musar say that famous vart that the rabbis love saying over. And that is that the badim, the rods, they represent the supporters of the Torah. The aron, of course, is the Torah. And the badim are those who carry the aron, carry the Torah. And from here you see, Lo yasuru mimenu. Hashem does not ever want that the supporters of the Torah should be separated from the Torah itself. The 2 of them, Yisachar and Zevulun, go hand in hand. They're undividable. They're inseparable. You cannot separate them. And therefore, when it comes to the badim of the Aron, lo yasuru mimenu. This is a famous vart that everyone has heard over the years, I'm sure. It's said over in the main name of many greats. Comes the Khatam Sofer, and he says something fantastic. He says, not only can't you separate the supporters from the Torah, but there's something much bigger going on here with this Aron. He says over in the name of his Rebbe, and this Khatam Sofer is found in the Torah Moshe in Perashat Terumah. He says over in the name of his Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, is the Rebbe of the Khatam Sofer, Zechut Tzaddik Lebracha. He says he heard from his Rebbe that the two cherubim, the two angels that looked at each other and faced each other as they stood on top of the Aron, they symbolized two chavrutot that were looking at each other constantly, learning together, and their base is nothing less than the Aron, the Torah itself. They stood on the Torah their whole existence. They looked at each other and they were constantly learning together as a havruta, one to another. And that was the secret, guys. We know that as long as the two cheruvim looked at each other and embraced each other, it was a siman that Hashem loved us. And chas v'shalom, when they turned away from each other, that was the moment that it showed that Hashem chas v'shalom was not happy with Klal Yisrael. What's the pshat? Well, according to this Khatam Sofer, there's a beauty. Because they symbolize havrutot. Kol zman, they were looking at each other, they were learning with each other. It showed that there was Torah in Klal Yisrael. And as long as there's Torah in Klal Yisrael, Hashem's with us. Hashem's with us. We could be messing up in many areas in life. We can mess up in many areas in life. But as long as a Jew has Torah, the detergent is constantly there to clean us up, to refine us, and to bring us back. The Torah is machzir ba'ala. It brings back the person to their roots, to their place, to their derech. The Torah always returns back to achsanya. It always comes back to those who learn her. And it straightens us out and it cleans us up. As long as we have Torah, Hashem's happy with us. Even if we're not the best. But if we're learning, Hashem's happy with us. And therefore, kol zman, that the two angels are looking at each other, the two chavrutot are looking eye to eye, learning with each other. It shows that Torah is in Klal Yisrael. Hashem's happy with us. But the minute they turn away, there's a rifyon in Torah. We don't have the Torah learners. We don't have Torah being learned in Klal Yisrael. That's the moment that we lost the magne umatzle. We lost Hashem's protection. We lost Hashem's love, chas v'shalom. That's an amazing idea. Two chavrutot. And if this is the case, says the Khatam Sofer, something novel. And this is based on that Orach Chaim that we started with. He says, think about it for a minute. In the time of the Midbar, who were the supporters of Torah? Hashem. Because in the Midbar you had the largest kollel of history. You had 3 million people sitting and learning at all times. How did we eat? The man dropped on our doorstep every morning. How did we drink? We had the Be'er of Miriam. How did we have clothing? The clothing miraculously grew with us, cleaned in the Ananei HaKavod. How did we have heating? How did we have air conditioning? We had the Ananei HaKavod. We had everything that one needed, and more so. Kol zman we were eating the lechem min hashamayim. Kol zman we were eating the man. It opened our minds to the brilliance of Torah. The Torah that went on in the Midbar was unbelievable. It was the greatest yeshiva of history. And look who the Rosh Yeshiva was. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Sanhedrin, Aharon HaKohen. They sat and learned with Moshe Rabbeinu Yomam V'Layla. Moshe would get up and give Shir Klali. He would give the Shiurim that he heard from Torah Hashem, from the Torah that he heard in Shamayim. And Klal Yisrael listened, bated breath. They drank the words. In the Midbar, everybody was learning. There was only learners in Klal Yisrael. There was no supporters of Torah, because everybody at that time was supported by Borei Olam. And therefore, in the Midbar, the only thing you needed to learn was one thing, and one thing you're only. Your Havruta. That's it. It's like a guy that goes to Bet Midrash. His parents are paying his tuition. His parents are paying his car. His parents are paying his insurance. Parents are even paying his gas. And dad hands him a credit card and tells him, listen, if stuff comes up, just put it on my card. Swipe. You need extra clothing. You need another white shirt. Swipe. I got you. All I want you to do is learn. This guy comes to yeshiva now. Does he have any dagot? Does he have any mortgage? Does he have any worries? Is he thinking about this or that or tomorrow or the next day or that week's rent or nothing? His meals, yeshiva. His clothing, dad. Tuition, dad. Everything's taken care of. Car, insurance. This guy, Bet Midrash, he has it made. There's only the one thing he needs to learn. I just need a chavrusa. That's it. Just give me my havruta. That's all I need. That was the midbar. All we needed for our Torah was a havruta. And therefore the Aaron in the midbar had just 2 angels. The 2 havrutot. Learning together to uphold the Aaron. Torah Hashem. All they needed in the midbar was me and my havruta, and that's it. And therefore the Aaron, the Torah, in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, had 2 angels. Because that's all you needed for Torah to be learned. Me and my havruta. But later on, Rabotai, open your hearts. When we left the Midbar and we entered Eretz Yisrael, and we came back now to a civilization, a society of cities and farmlands and parnassah that needs to be made, because now the man stopped falling. There's no more man. There's no more Be'er Miriam. There's no more Ananei HaKavod. Now we got to go out and do something. Now B'ze'at apecha tochal lechem. Now you got to earn a living. Torah ma teheh aleha. What's going to be with Torah? How are people going to learn? Oh, now we need the supporters of Torah to step up. Where some people in Klal Yisrael are going to be the Yisachar, and some people of Klal Yisrael are going to be the Zevulun. And one is going to lean on the other. One's going to lean on the other. Says Shlomo HaMelech, the original Aaron was in the Midbar. All it needed was 2 angels. Me and my havruta. That's all I needed to keep the Torah going. But now, in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, in Eretz Yisrael, there is no man, there is no be'er. Who's going to keep the Torah learners going? We need another 2 angels to support the original 2 angels. We need another 2 angels. Just like in the time of Moshe, the original 2 angels with 2 havrutot, Yisachar, he added another 2 angels for Zevulun. These are going to be the supporters of the angels, of those in Klal Yisrael that are learning. And therefore he saw fit to add another 2 angels. How could he do that? Where did he get the right, the license to change something that Borei Olam said? And the truth is, it was right there in the first pasuk that we read in the Parashat at the get-go of the creating of the Aaron in the first place. Says the pasuk, Ve'asita shnayim kiruvim zahav, mikshat ha'aseh otam, mishnei kitzot ha'kaporet. Make the Aaron with 2 angels. But then the next pasuk says, "Va'aseh kruv echad mikatzeh mizeh, v'chruv echad mikatzeh mizeh." Wait 1 second. Why are we repeating a second time another 2 angels? Says the Chatam Sofer or a Chaim HaKadosh, because this Aaron was meant to be built in stages. The first pasuk is in the Midbar, where at that time there is no one that needs to support Torah, because we're living with the man and the be'er. Hashem supporting us. All you need to learn is your havruta. And therefore the original Aaron came with me and my chavrusa. Yisachar. Two angels looking at each other, learning together. Orangutan in the sugya. They're loving the Torah, talking in Torah, day and night. In the midbar, that's all you needed to learn, was me and my Havruta, two angels. But then later on, when it came time for Shlomo HaMelech, says the next pasuk, V'aseh kruv echad mizeh, v'kruv echad mizeh. We're going to need another two angels in order to support the original two angels of Havrutot. They were Yisachar, and now we need the supporters. Add another two angels, and they're the Zevulun that's going to support the Torah of Klal Yisrael. It's incredible. What a beautiful pshat. What an unbelievable concept. And if this is the case, I think you could see from here how great the concept of supporting Torah really is. You know that Rabbeinu Yonah writes that by far one of the greatest mitzvot, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It's amazing. We were learning in the Arucha program in the morning. We learn Hilchot Tzedakah. And over there in Shulchan Aruch, Maram Paskins, that if you have a town that the Hegmon, the mayor, the governor, is a ruthless guy, and when he doesn't get taxes, he beats people up. So therefore the halacha stated that the leaders of that Jewish town should negotiate a one-price deal for the taxes of the whole town, so that it'll include everybody's taxes, so the aniyim of that city, when it comes time for their individual tax to be paid, and they're not going to have money, those Jews shouldn't get beaten up. Pikuach nefesh, their lives are on the line. Make one sum, one deal, and pay everyone's in one shot. So like this, you save the poor people from the beatings and the pikuach nefesh. It's a halakha Shulchan Aruch. And Maran says over there, even if you have money that was earmarked for Talmud Torah or Sefer Torah, if you need that money to pay off this tax, to save the lives of the poor people, that they don't get the beatings from the tax collector, you must use that Torah money for this instead. Asks the Taz, Bamakom, what do you mean? Hayadua, the Gemara in Megillah, the Gemara tells us, Gadol Talmud Torah mi pikuach nefesh. Talmud Torah is greater than pikuach nefesh. What do you tell me to take money that was earmarked for Talmud Torah and use it for pikuach nefesh, that these guys shouldn't get beatings? Talmud Torah is greater. You can't use the money for something less lofty. Answers the Taz something amazing. He says the words is Gadol Talmud Torah. It doesn't say that Talmud Torah is doche pikuach nefesh. Of course, if you have a situation that somebody's life is on the line, it comes first. Pikuach nefesh comes first. Even Shabbat, doche, even Talmud Torah, there's nothing to talk about. A person's life is on the line, you save their life. Pikuach nefesh comes first. He says, but you know what the Gemara was saying there? Gadol Talmud Torah. The schar for learning Torah is greater than the schar for even saving pikuach nefesh, a life of another Jew. We don't know how great Talmud Torah is. And therefore there's nothing in this world that you can involve yourself in that could render a return of greater schar than the learning of Torah. It's even greater, the schar of learning Torah, than the schar of saving somebody's life. So says the Taz as he explains that Gemara Megillah. Wow, that's unbelievable. Gadol Talmud Torah. Because of this, says Rabbeinu Yonah, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It's the greatest mitzvah of all. But then says Rabbeinu Yonah, but be careful. Just like the Talmud Torah mitzvah of learning Torah is the greatest mitzvah, Bitul Torah is chas v'shalom one of the worst averot. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, how does a person be mitaken bitul Torah? Listen to this, Rabbeinu Yonah. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, you want to be mitaken bitul Torah? Because everybody runs into the avon of bitul Torah. You know what bitul Torah is? You had an extra few minutes and you wasted time. We're in a generation of wasting time. We're in a generation that people are looking to kill time. You ever hear people say that? What can I do to kill some time? Kill some time. Time is life. Killing time is killing a person. Wasting time is bitul Torah. How much time do we waste? And today with social media, you jump on for a second and it's so luring and so pulling. You turn around, it's 3 hours later. Where did the time go? One this clip, one that, this newscast, that, besides the schmutz. But the time, it rips your time away. It robs your time. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, today who can get away from the Avona Bitul Torah? Who can say that we didn't waste any time? The Vilna Gaon, at the end of his day, was able to be mechashben. If there was a few minutes that he left over with just enough kochot to fill every minute of the day with Torah, who can do that today? Says Rabbeinu Yonah, the way to be mitaken bitul Torah is al yedei supporting Torah. When you support other people to learn, it's mitaken the bitul Torah that a person, chas v'shalom, fell into. Support the learning of Talmidei Chachamim. And by the way, that does not exempt you from your learning. We have an obligation to learn every minute that we can, that we have available. But on top of that, we should also try to support Torah to make up for any of the bitul Torah that chas v'shalom we might have fell into over the years. This is an unbelievable idea. And if this is the case, Rabotai, listen to this. It's a privilege to support Torah. You might not have known this, but many years ago, there were the great rabbis that were all together in Eretz Yisrael in a clandestine meeting. And they were working out this incredible meeting of how to get support for the yeshivot of Eretz Yisrael, for the kolelim of Eretz Yisrael. And they were coming up with ideas and back and forth and handling different ideas. Just then the door of the room opens and in walks Rabbi Lorenz. And he comes and he says, Rabotai, you're not going to believe this. Prime Minister Menachem Begin, he's ready to put forward a taksiv that the Israeli government is going to support all the yeshivot and all the kolelim in Israel. Could you believe that? Never again will the rabbi have to go traveling the world, knocking on offices, knocking on doors, asking to support his yeshivot. Now the rabbanim could actually go back to learning. When they heard that, there was a cheer. Everyone started clapping. It was like Yom Tov. We can finally sit down and learn. We don't have any more the worry of how to support the yeshivot. And just then Reb Shach quiets the room down and he says, Rabotai, you're making a mistake. We can't take the money. He said, what? Why not? We'll be able to go back to sit and learn. We don't have to be Rabbanim in Galut, constantly traveling all over the world. Shach says, we can't take the money. Because if we take the money, you'll be taking away from Klal Yisrael the biggest zechut that they survive on. You can't do that to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael's Yeshuot, said Reb Shach, comes from the support of Torah. And if you take that away from them, where are they going to get their Yeshuot from? My Rebbe, Rabbi Roman, from Tiferes Elimelech, in 8th grade, he was very close to Reb Shneur Kotler, Zechut Tzadik. He was very close to Reb Aaron. He told us this amazing story I remember many years ago when I was a kid. He said that one day an old man walked into the back of the Lakewood Bet Midrash, and the old Bet Midrash. I think the story goes back to the 60s. This old man sits in the back and everyone turns around and they recognize him. That's Mr. Hess from Hess gas stations. Hess Oil. You know, the Hess family, they own the New York Jets. Hess gas stations. He's a billionaire in the 60s. You know what that is today? Oh. And they saw the old man was watching, and he saw the learning and the tumult and the havrutot. You know, we talked about the two angels, the havrutot. He was impressed. The yeshiva got a call later on that Mr. Hess was so taken that he placed BMG, Lakewood Yeshiva, in his will. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine getting a piece of $1 billion in those years, in the 60s? Today it's like 10 billion. The yeshiva, when they heard this, it was like Yehudim. They never have to collect another penny. They'll be able to bring in 1,000 kolel yugalite. They'll never have to worry how to pay the yeshiva. Torah in its glory. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler smiled and he said, don't count on it. Don't get excited. Don't get excited. I said, Rabbi Aaron, what do you mean? He put us in the will. He put the Lakewood Yeshiva in the will. Rabbi Aaron said, don't get excited. Don't count on it. It was a year or so later, whatever that time period was, that my Rebbe told me, Mr. Hess passes away. And you could imagine, the yeshiva now was coming to collect their piece of the pie, and then they get a phone call that the children, they were protesting the will of their father. They said that their father was so old that at the time he put the yeshiva into the will, he wasn't 100%. And because of that, he wasn't doing, his whole life he didn't really give to yeshivot. All of a sudden, the last few months, they contested the will. He wasn't 100%. They took it to court and they won. And the yeshiva lost. They came to Rabbi Aaron Kotler and said, Rosh Yeshiva, how did you know? And Rabbi Aaron said, you need to have a zechut to support Torah. And apparently, he did not have that zechut. You need a zechut to support Torah. Not everyone is given the privilege to support Torah. A lot of wonderful people out there, and their names are on the walls of hospitals, and their names on the walls of nursing homes. We know a certain Jew that very rich, that just gave $20 million to the public school system in Newark, New Jersey, to the Abid. That's where his money went. That's where his money went. You need a zechut to support Torah. It's amazing today, the Jewish philanthropy, it's all over the world. Save the dolphins! That's where the money is going to when you don't have zechut Torah. To support Torah, you need a zechut. Not everyone is given the privilege to be allowed to support Torah. You need a zechut to support Torah. And therefore said Shlomo HaMelech, yes, in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem was supporting Klal Yisrael. All we needed on the Aron of Torah was just a Havrutah. That was the era of Yisachar. But later on, he added another 2 angels to support the original 2 because they represented Zevulun, the supporters of Torah. We should be lucky enough to be those who support Torah and learn Torah. We just had a rabbi that passed. He was a giant. He was a giant of a tzaddik, and his love was for Torah and Talmidei Chachamim. Quietly, so many aniyim Talmidei Chachamim he supported, and nobody knew about it. He left over a legacy. He planted the seeds of the love of Torah and the fathers, so that today, all the children that you see are walking around young Talmidei Chachamim. The brickwork was laid in the old country. We should be zocheh to have a zechut to support Torah and to be the ones to learn ad biat hagoel. Thank you for listening.